Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to those of you that are connected with us via the web as well. Good to see all of you here today that are in person. Always nice to be together with everyone on the Sabbath. In my Bible study that I want to share with you today, I have based this on some of my recent studies in the book of Genesis. I came across a principle there that just happens to be right in the middle of the debate between believing that God created the heavens and the earth, the universe, and evolution. It was in a recent sermon on the purpose of man that I shared some interesting quotes with you from atheists who readily admit that their belief in evolution is a religion, that they believe it needs to be taught to young people. And of course, the contrast is, whereas God says when we humans were created by Him with the incredible potential to become spirit beings and members of His eternal family, evolution postures that humans are mere cosmic accidents, devoid of any special purpose and without hope of an afterlife. So just if you look at those two at face value, I think I'd rather choose God. When you talk about the end result of what is going to be there, I think that ought to make a choice pretty simple. But we know that the Bible reveals that just as Eve was deceived in the garden by Satan the devil, that mankind has basically been deceived and blinded as well. And so it's not surprising that there are many people today that don't believe in God and believe that human beings should be able to decide for themselves right from wrong, good from evil, and in essence, they don't feel that they need any God, and I guess they are their own gods. They make their own decisions of what they want to think and what they want to believe. I think many of us are aware that the Bible says that the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. That's found two places in the Psalms. I won't turn to these. Psalm 14, verse 1, and Psalm 53 and verse 1. And as I was glancing at these, it seems that David was the author of both of these Psalms, and it is repeated where David makes that observation. Well, today, from the book of Genesis, I want to focus on an important issue that really supports this observation that King David made. The subject and title of our study here today is After Its Kind. After its kind. Some of you that have been around for a number of years may recognize that immediately as a principle that is involved in the debate between evolution and creationism. But as we begin doing this, I want to make a statement here that in this Bible study, this is an invitation for us to think and to reason. God says, come, let us reason together. God's not opposed to people thinking and logically examining issues. In fact, that's a good thing for us to do, to use the mind that we've been given. And it seems like that should be a logical, easy statement to make, but actually it's something that evolutionists do not like students to do. They don't like for students to question or reason, especially when it comes to the subject of evolution. This concept, or the concept of intelligent design, maybe some of you have heard of that philosophy or that teaching. It is the contrast today between evolution and the belief that there was design in the creation that was there. Evolutionists claim that intelligent design is simply a backdoor attempt to try to get God into the classroom. They call it pseudoscience, but technically, intelligent design is not creationism. It doesn't deal with God. It simply points out the flaws in the evolutionary theory. And I might just mention to you that we have on our Life, Hope, and Truth website a silo called the God Silo, and then there are sections under each one of the silos, and there is a subsection or a sub-silo, as we call it, on evolution. And the leading article, the overview article on that sub-silo regarding evolution is an article written by Mike Bennett. And in it, he goes through a number of these terms and explains in definitions in terms of what neo-Darwinism is. Neo-Darwinism means new Darwinism that's been updated from the glaring flaws that were with the original hypothesis, to the general theory of evolution, to intelligent design, and then articles showing some of the issues that are involved with intelligent design. We believe intelligent design makes more sense than evolution, and of course we obviously also believe in God. I might just mention a few things too. As I was looking at this particular issue, I was trying to educate myself as to where things currently stand regarding teaching evolution in school. And I found that there is a campaign called Teach the Controversy, is an effort that has backers of intelligent design have used to request that both sides be taught in high school science classes. Evolutionists do not like for anyone to question what they teach and what they believe. And interestingly to me, the Texas Board of Education for many years encouraged students to evaluate the merits of the theory of evolution. That was part of what was in the textbooks. Well, obviously, the proponents of evolution didn't like that. They called Texas a very backward state with poor standards of education, but that's what's to be expected in this debate. People, just an aside here, most of you have probably realized that people don't really want to have a discussion. They want to shut people down that don't agree with them, annihilate them, and don't give them the opportunity to have a discussion or express their point of view. So much for freedom of speech and expression and communication these days. But that's where things stand on this particular issue. And apparently it was in April of 2017 that the Texas Board of Education took the word evaluate out of their guidance and replaced it with compare and contrast explanations regarding cellular complexity. Well, evolutionists still don't like that. And they claim that the majority of scientists agree that evolution is a proven scientific fact, and that there should be no invitation to students to evaluate, compare, or contrast what they are being taught. Well, I think most of us that have been around for a number of years realize a majority opinion doesn't mean that something is true. Many years ago, the majority of scientists thought that the sun revolved around the earth. Many years ago, medical doctors thought that bloodletting was a healthy practice for things to do. A number of years from now, I'm sure there will be things that people will look back on and will say how crude and rudimentary were the ideas and thoughts that people had today. But that's the issue. Well, with this background, let's go to the biblical text. Let's turn to Genesis chapter 1. This is where we're going to find the issue after its kind that this study is titled after. And as we turn here, let me just give you a statement, a disclaimer of sorts, and that is that the Bible is not written as a science textbook, but the Bible does not contradict genuine science, accurate science, legitimate science that doesn't delve into philosophy, into an area that it's not capable of discerning. And that's part of the problem with the evolutionary theory. It cannot be proven, it cannot be falsified, it's just a theory that ignores the biblical text that is there. But as we come to Genesis chapter 1, let's notice verses 11 and 12. Genesis chapter 1, let's read verses 11 and 12. It says, "Then God said, let the earth bring forth grass, the herb that yields seed, and the fruit tree that yields fruit according to its kind." And there's that phrase, according to its kind. And I believe it's the King James Version that uses after its kind the phrase, whose seed is in itself on the earth, and it was so. And the earth brought forth grass, the herb that yields seed, according to its kind, and the tree that yields fruit, whose seed is in itself according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. These things happened, and says, and so the evening and morning were the third day. Then we come down to verse 21, and we read about something that occurred on the fifth day. Verse 21, so God created great sea creatures and every living thing that moves, with which the waters abounded according to their kind, and every winged bird according to its kind, and God saw that it was good. Then skip down a few more verses, verse 24 through 25. Then God said, let the earth bring forth the living creatures according to its kind, cattle and creeping thing and beast of the earth, each according to its kind, and it was so. And God made the beast of the earth according to its kind, cattle according to its kind, and everything that creeps on the earth according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And of course, then we come to the statement about God saying, let us make man in our image, in our likeness. And so the contrast with kinds, we obviously see the implication that human beings were made after the God kind, or in a likeness, a type, but not with the same powers that God has. So vegetation, sea creatures, birds, and animals were each created according to their kind. Now, for us to understand what after its kind means, verses 11 and 12 give us an explanation that within the different kinds of vegetation, the seeds of the plant produce the same plant. In general, kinds, therefore, we come to understand, refer to species. The seed is in the plant, and as we gardeners know, vegetables, other than hybrids, produce their own seed, and you can grow plants from those seeds. Now, if it's a hybrid, it's sterile and you can't grow that from its seeds, but I've experimented just a little bit myself. It used to be years ago, I'm dating myself now, that a red bell pepper was a really special pepper to be able to have, and you pay a little extra money to get a red one instead of one of those green ones. And then later, they came out with the yellow and the orange as well. Well, I figured out, I said, I'm going to try planting some of these red seeds out of a red bell pepper. And guess what? They grow peppers, they sprout, they germinate, and the plant grows up and produces more red bell peppers. And so I found out I didn't have to buy those expensive packets of seed, saved myself a couple bucks. And you can do the same thing with the orange peppers and the yellow peppers. But then most of us have probably seen these little tiny peppers that are the red, the yellow, and the orange. Well, I've tested those seeds too. And those are hybrid. You don't grow peppers from those. The plants don't, the seeds don't germinate. And so we're right back into this, the seed of something will reproduce after itself. And then there's the verses mentioning sea creatures and birds and animals. These don't speak of the reproduction in the same way that the ones do regarding trees and vegetation, but the principle remains the same. We know that fish produce the same kinds of fish, and animals produce their same kinds. We don't have fish producing elephants or cows reproducing goldfish. And when I plant a pepper seed in the ground, I'm not expecting a cat or dog to appear. And I say that facetiously, but I say it on purpose because evolution postulates that all life came from one speck of life, that one cell that continued to develop to make all of these different species. And you say, well, that's preposterous. You can't, it won't happen. Well, they say, well, maybe it could. If you could have done millions and billions of years, that pepper seed might turn out to be a cow. Really? Is that Is that possible, the way that it would work? Well, right here in the Bible, we see a principle of reproduction after its kind. The species stay within each species. The Bible says God created each of these kinds, and it's through observation and rational logic we can realize that there are boundaries between these kinds when it comes to reproduction. And in spite of no known observation or documentation of this law of reproduction having ever been violated, the theory of evolution takes a wild leap of faith to postulate that it did happen and that kinds crossed boundaries when it came to reproduction. Charles Darwin speculated that transition fossils would be found showing one species evolving into another. But there have been no such fossil discoveries. And even Darwin himself realized this was a grave weakness to his theory. So what do evolutionists today say or do regarding this? They basically ignore this flaw, and they will say it just has not been discovered yet. They have to have faith that something that has never been documented and that laws seem to prohibit the intercrossing and reproduction and production of a new species, they have to believe that somehow it happened somewhere back in history. They wouldn't and don't accept any other science to postulate such an idea and accept it unless it is proven. But this one they will accept. Now, there are various definitions for a species. From biological species concept, I read you this quote regarding the definition of a species. Most broadly, a species is a group of organisms with a shared, closed gene pool. According to this definition, a species is made up of all the organisms that are able to mate with each other and produce fertile offspring. For example, lions produce offspring with other lions and tigers with other tigers. However, if lions and tigers are brought together in captivity, they can occasionally produce a hybrid. And I think I'm pronouncing this right, called a liger or a tigon. But these hybrids are not themselves able to reproduce. Without being able to produce fertile offspring, it then follows that lions and tigers are separate species. Another term used for the inability to interbreed is reproductive isolation. Well, now, that is a working definition of the species, but unfortunately, there is a dishonesty that is used by evolutionists in terms of understanding this, and it's based on this distinction of species being able to breed and reproduce themselves within the species and not cross species. It has to do with two different terms. One is microevolution, that refers to species being able to vary and develop. And the other is macroevolution, which means to be able to jump beyond one species or to produce a new species. I'd like to share a few quotes with you from an article on microevolution versus macroevolution by the late Jim Springer. The late Jim Springer was an elder in the Church of God, a worldwide association from California, and he has written some articles for us that are still on the Life, Hope, and Truth website, some very fine material. He explains regarding these two terms, beginning in the 1930s, the term microevolution was used by some to describe changes within existing species. Microevolution refers to varieties within a given type. Change happens within a group, but the descendant is clearly of the same type as the ancestor. This might better be called variation or adaptation, but the changes are horizontal in effect, not vertical. Such changes might be accomplished by natural selection, in which a trait within the present variety is selected as the best for a given set of conditions, or accomplished by artificial selection, such as when dog breeders produce a new breed of dog. The small or microevolutionary changes occur by recombining existing genetic material within the group. As Gregor Mendel observed with his breeding studies on peas in the mid-1980s, there are natural limits to genetic change. A population of organisms can vary only so much. And it's the variation and adaptation, sometimes is referred to as microevolution, does not conflict with the biblical account of creation. God created that variety into all life that we see on earth, all kinds of plants and animals that he created. You know, I looked at this, and I think most of us are familiar with the fact that there are a number of different breeds of dogs. I was intrigued with the little dachshund. I think most of us are familiar with a dachshund. Sometimes they're called wiener dogs, sausage dog. They were developed several hundred years ago by the Germans, hence no surprise there, Dachshund. Hund for dog, my limited amount of German that I still recall. But they were actually bred and designed, they were sometimes called badger dogs. They were hunting dogs. Now that's a surprise, but apparently these dogs were bred to have the little short feet so they could go into burrows, and they were willing to fight badgers. And so anyway, they were, I guess, a pretty strong fighting dog. And you can breed these characteristics into dogs. You keep taking the dogs and breeding the ones with the shortest legs, the longest bodies. Pretty soon you got a sausage on legs. And we've got a whole breed that are dachshund dogs today. But you know what? They breed only dogs. And if they breed with another type of dog, you get half of a sausage dog. And depending on, you know, how many of the traits that are there, but within the species, they always stay dogs. They don't become goldfish. They don't have an accident and all of a sudden there's an elephant. They don't cross species. They stay within the dog species. And so what we see even today with these variations within microevolution, we see these things happening, but there's this barrier with species, and the Bible gives us the definition that God created the animals this way, with their kinds, and there are natural boundaries that seem to be built into these kinds that in the way that God made and His creation. And we read this right here from the very beginning. So microevolution is observed in nature and in artificial breeding and is non-controversial. We agree with evolutionists that microevolution takes place, that you can breed different kinds of dogs, you can come up with the different breeds that are there. It is the variation we see due to the variety in the genes of the parent organisms, all within the same species, are biblical kind. Macroevolution, however, is controversial and is at the heart of the debate between evolutionists and creationists. Continuing from Mr. Springer's article, he writes, macroevolution refers to major evolutionary changes over time, the origin of new types of organisms from previously existing but different ancestral types. Examples of this would be fish descending from an invertebrate animal or whales descending from a land mammal. The evolutionary concept demands these bizarre changes. Evolutionists assume that the small horizontal Microevolutionary changes, which are observed, lead to large vertical macroevolutionary changes which have never been observed. This philosophical leap of faith lies at the eve of evolution thinking. So anyway, that is the distinction and the difference. As I was saying, macroevolution has never been observed in nature, but evolutionists will dishonestly say that evolution has been proven true. What is true is that microevolution, the variation within species, does occur, and that is what they say and where evolution has been proven. This accounts for the different types of dogs, but microevolution does not prove macroevolution. It's dishonest to say that it does. But evolutionists in their teaching, they are dishonest and they say that. So that's the challenge that we are dealing with. If you haven't studied this subject in a while, there are several excellent articles on the Life, Hope, and Truth website under the God silo, the evolution sub-silo. Some of these, I'll share a couple of these. One is titled A Science Teacher's Arguments Against Evolution by Martin Cole. He is one of our members who is also an educator. There's also Theistic Evolution, An Ungodly Compromise by Joshua Travers. There's some people today that want to believe in God and in evolution and take a little bit of both, kind of meet in the middle, but that really does not match up with the biblical record. Another one is titled How Organic Chemistry Convinced Me of the Creator. That was actually written by Mr. Steve Moody, our pastor down in San Antonio. He, as many of you know, was studying pharmacy, intended to go into that, and was taking chemistry and many of those things, and an interesting article from him. Then there's the microevolution and macroevolution that I've quoted from by Jim Springer. And then here's another very interesting one, Frauds and Hoaxes in the Evolutionary Tree by Eddie Johnson. Eddie Johnson is one of our elders from the UK, and he writes about some of the things that have been found out, that there were actual frauds in dating, supposedly to prove evolution. There was also the story of the Piltdown Man turned out to be a hoax. And so actual issues in terms of so-called proof of evolution that turned out to be hoaxes and lies. And he actually explained that as he was growing up in school, he was taught some of those things. Interesting article there. And perhaps some of you that, if you went to Ambassador College, you may remember a book titled After Its Kind by Byron Nelson. This is a somewhat dated book. It was first copyrighted in 1927, then in 1952, revised in 1967. Some of the scientific terms have adjusted a bit, but the general preference and concepts have remained true. Well, what is it, as I wrap this up, why is there so much hatred of God? Why is there an unwillingness to accept God as the Creator? I think Romans chapter 1 has an excellent explanation as to why this is the case. Let's read a few verses here from Romans chapter 1, and we'll read verses 18 through 21. Romans 1, beginning in verse 18. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Because what may be known of God is manifest in them, for God has shown it to them. For since the creation of the world, His invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even His eternal power and Godhead, so they are without excuse. In other words, as the psalmist said, the heavens declare the glory of God. The creation around us in all its intricacy should tell us that there is a God. The concept of intelligent design shows that there was a mind, an intelligent mind in the way that our world has been created, the way that it's come to be. Evolution, on the other hand, said stuff, matter, atoms, everything started from dumb, unintelligent dirt, no intelligence behind it, and that it just spontaneously came into existence. That was the belief that was there. For many years, proof of evolution was that flies and maggots bred on manure, that suddenly a life form appeared there. Or in stagnant water, tadpoles would appear. We know today that frogs laid eggs, and that's where the tadpoles came from. It wasn't that the water generated life and that something was there. And what Romans 1 is telling us is if we simply look at the creation and the complexity that is there, evolutionists have had to eat their words that it seems like every generation there's a new level of complexity that is found on the cellular level. New things are discovered and found that make it more complex, and that there's education and communication that is taking place at such a subatomic level that is profound and that is amazing. The world and the building blocks of nature show design and intelligence behind them in a way that the theory of evolution never imagined from its outset. But evolutionists do not want to accept God, and God says they are without excuse. There has been evidence for them to see, even in our creation. And why? Verse 21, because although they knew God, they did not glorify Him as God, nor were thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Eventually, the mind becomes incapable of accepting God and unwilling to accept God. There was one famous evolutionist that made the statement that even to allow God to have created the first matter and then evolution to have gone from there was unthinkable because we couldn't let God get His foot in the door. If we did, we'd have to allow Him other things, and that just wasn't going to be possible. Could not be accepted by humans, at least those that wanted to hold to the theory of evolution and that there is no God. So Romans 1 provides, I think, an explanation of why we see what it is there. But whenever we read this phrase, after its kind, as we see in Genesis chapter 1, what I've tried to share with you today is that there is a concept that is involved with that particular phrase that takes us right into the evolution versus creation debate that is taking place. And David's comments about the fool saying in his heart, there is no God, this phrase, after its kind, in one sense, echoes what David was saying.